You're standing in a chamber 60 feet beneath the Aventine Hill, and the air smells like human waste, fear, and centuries of accumulated despair. The ceiling is so low you can't stand upright. Water drips somewhere in the darkness. Your wrists are chained to an iron ring embedded in volcanic rock that's been here since before Rome was Rome. You've been here 3 days, or maybe 4. Time dissolves underground where there's no sun to mark its passage. You're 19 years old, captured during a grain riot in Ostia, and you've just discovered that the Roman judicial system has a place specifically designed to make people like you disappear. The archaeologists who exposed these chambers in 1927 tried to be clinical about what they found. They measured the dimensions. They cataloged the iron restraint systems. They documented the drainage channels cut into the floor. But their reports, buried in Italian archaeological journals that nobody reads anymore, contain details they couldn't quite make sterile. Scratches on the walls forming crude calendars, bone fragments showing signs of deliberate breakage, evidence of continuous occupation spanning over 600 years, and most disturbing, construction techniques that prove these weren't accidental caves or natural formations. These were purpose-built holding facilities, expanded and improved across generations, representing an infrastructure of disappearance that the Roman state maintained with the same bureaucratic efficiency it applied to aqueducts and roads. Here's what the archaeology actually shows. The chamber complex beneath the Aventine Hill consists of at least 47 separate rooms connected by narrow passages, some barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. The earliest construction dates to approximately 400 BCE, during the early Republican period, which means Romans were building subterranean detention facilities before they conquered Italy, before the Punic Wars, before they became an empire. This wasn't a practice that emerged from imperial decadence. This was foundational to Roman state power from the beginning, and the Aventine complex wasn't unique. Similar structures have been identified beneath the Capitoline Hill, near the Circus Maximus, and in the substructures of the Colosseum. Everywhere the Roman state needed to control populations, it built invisible architecture to remove problematic individuals from public view. Let me show you how this actually worked, because the mechanics of disappearance are always more disturbing than the concept. You're arrested, maybe for theft, maybe for debt, maybe for being in the wrong place during a political purge, maybe for no documented reason at all because Roman law allowed summary detention for anyone classified as suspicious to public order. You're not taken to a public prison. Those exist, but they're for people whose detention serves a political purpose, whose imprisonment sends a message. You're nobody. Your disappearance won't be noticed, or if it is, nobody with power will care. So you're taken to a public building, in this case, the Temple of Diana on the Aventine Hill, a major religious site that processes hundreds of visitors daily. Somewhere in the administrative sections of that temple, there's a doorway. Through that doorway, there are stairs. Those stairs descend into volcanic rock that forms the hill's foundation. And at the bottom of those stairs, you enter a system that was designed with terrifying sophistication. The first chamber is the processing area. Archaeological evidence shows it contained wooden desks. You can still see the mounting holes in the floor where furniture legs were anchored. This is where your name gets recorded in administrative ledgers if you're important enough to record. Most people aren't. The excavation found thousands of iron manacles in various sizes, suggesting a standardized system for restraint. You're chained. Your possessions, if you have any, are confiscated. Then you're moved deeper into the complex, and here's where the archaeology becomes genuinely nightmarish, because it reveals intentional design features that maximize psychological destruction. The chambers get progressively smaller and lower as you move deeper. The first detention rooms have 7-foot ceilings, uncomfortable but livable. The final chambers, the ones reserved for long-term holding or people the state wants to break completely, have 4-foot ceilings. You can't stand, you can't sit upright. You exist in a permanent crouch or lie in your own filth. The Romans understood that destroying the body's ability to assume natural postures destroys psychological coherence. Skeletal remains recovered from these chambers show severe spinal deformities, joint damage, and bone degradation consistent with prolonged immobility in constrained positions. These weren't quick holding cells. People lived here for months or years, and their bodies transformed to fit the space they were forced to occupy. The ventilation system is where Roman engineering precision becomes an instrument of torture. The chambers have air shafts, narrow vertical tunnels that connect to the surface. These prevented carbon dioxide buildup that would kill occupants too quickly, but the shafts are positioned to create acoustic channels. Sound from the temple above, prayers, hymns, festivals, daily life, filters down into the chambers below. You can hear the city, you can hear freedom, you can hear everything you've been removed from. And you can scream all you want, but the acoustic properties work in only one direction. Nobody up there hears you. The archaeological team tested this in 1927. A man shouting in the deepest chamber couldn't be heard in the temple above, even when researchers were specifically listening for it. The silence of your suffering was engineered. Now understand who ended up here, because the demographic profile tells you everything about how Roman society actually functioned beneath its marble facades. Skeletal analysis from the chamber excavations identified remains of at least 300 individuals. Age ranges from early adolescence to elderly. Both male and female remains present, though skewed heavily male, about 70%. Dental analysis and bone chemistry studies suggest most came from lower economic classes, high rates of childhood nutritional stress, evidence of hard physical labor from young ages, dental wear patterns consistent with coarse-grained diets. These weren't political prisoners or enemy combatants. These were Rome's own people. The poor, the indebted, the enslaved, the politically inconvenient, the mentally ill, the criminally accused who couldn't afford defense. Here's a specific case the archaeology documents in painful detail. In Chamber 23, excavators found the complete skeleton of a woman aged approximately 25-30, chained in a sitting position against the wall. Her leg bones showed evidence of a poorly healed fracture that had fused at an awkward angle, making walking difficult. Her spine showed advanced tuberculosis. The iron collar around her neck had corroded into her cervical vertebrae, meaning she wore it for years, long enough for metal oxidation to literally merge with her bone structure. Near her remains, scratched into the soft tufa rock, is a name. Prima, just that, a name. One word representing an entire life that ended in darkness, in pain, in isolation so complete that her death went unnoticed until archaeologists found her 2,000 years later. The drainage system is perhaps the most coldly efficient element. Every chamber has channels cut into the floor that slope towards central collection tunnels. These channels served dual purposes, removing water seepage that would flood the chambers and removing human waste. The system flows into the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer, meaning everything and everyone that needed to disappear could be literally washed into the infrastructure that carried waste out of the city. Bodies, when people died, didn't require special disposal. They became part of the hydraulic system. The Romans engineered their detention facilities with the same rational efficiency they applied to public baths. The difference is nobody builds monuments to this engineering. But here's where the story becomes about more than ancient Roman cruelty. The Aventine chambers were used continuously from approximately 400 BCE to at least 300 CE, 700 years. That's longer than the United States has existed as a nation. Generation after generation of Romans, across regime changes from republic to empire, through periods of expansion and crisis, maintained and utilized this infrastructure of disappearance. It wasn't an aberration. It was normal, routine. The same civilization that gave us philosophy, architecture, and legal principles that form the foundation of Western law also gave us this systematic, bureaucratic, invisible violence built into the literal bedrock of state power. And it continued after Rome fell. During the medieval period, when the Aventine Hill became populated by monasteries and churches, evidence suggests some of these chambers were still accessible and still used. Monastic records from the 11th century mention correction cells in the foundations of Santa Sabina Basilica. Archaeological surveys have connected some of those medieval correction cells to the original Roman detention chambers. The architecture of disappearance outlived the empire that built it, repurposed by new authorities for new populations of undesirables. The infrastructure persisted because the impulse it served persisted. The 1927 excavation team, led by archaeologist Giacomo Boni, almost didn't publish their findings. Archival records show that Boni argued with his colleagues about whether exposing this system would damage Rome's historical reputation during a period when Mussolini's fascist government was actively promoting Roman imperial glory. Eventually they published, but in obscure academic journals with limited circulation. The Aventine chambers remain largely unknown to general audiences. They're not on tourist maps, there are no plaques. If you visit the Aventine Hill today, you'll see beautiful churches, the famous keyhole view of St. Peter's Basilica, orange gardens, and wealthy residential areas. Nothing acknowledges what lies beneath your feet. Here's what the archaeological evidence forces us to confront. The capacity for systematic dehumanization isn't an aberration of modernity. It isn't something that emerged with industrialization or totalitarian regimes. It's foundational to state power across human history. The Romans built chambers specifically designed to make people suffer in isolation, to break bodies and minds through environmental conditions that were deliberately engineered to maximize harm, while maintaining biological survival long enough to extract whatever value the state determined these people possessed. Whether that value was labor, information, or simply the demonstration of state authority through the power to make someone disappear. You're still in that chamber, by the way, 3 days or 4, you've lost count. Your wrists are bleeding where the iron manacles cut into your skin. You can hear the sounds of the city above, vendors calling out their wares, children playing, the normal rhythms of Roman life. You scream until your throat is raw, but nobody comes. Nobody hears. You understand now that this is the point. The chamber isn't just holding you. It's teaching you that your voice doesn't matter, that your suffering is invisible, that you exist only to the extent that the state acknowledges your existence and the state has chosen not to. The definitive truth isn't that Romans were uniquely cruel or that ancient societies were more brutal than modern ones. The truth is that power, when given the opportunity and the infrastructure, will disappear people. Will build systems to make that disappearance efficient, clean, and invisible to the populations who benefit from state order. The Aventine chambers weren't primitive dungeons built in ignorance. They were sophisticated solutions to a problem that states have always faced: what to do with human beings who threaten, inconvenience, or simply fail to fit into the social order. And the solution Rome chose, maintained across centuries, was to build beautiful temples on the surface while engineering torture chambers in the bedrock beneath. The archaeology exposed this. The chambers are there, documented, measurable, real. But exposure doesn't automatically translate to reckoning. Most people who visit Rome never learn these chambers exist. The tour focus on glory, the Forum, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, all built by the same civilization that engineered the Aventine complex, using the same mathematical precision and architectural genius, for purposes that serve state power in very different ways. If you've learned anything from this investigation into what actually lies beneath Rome's most sacred hills, hit that subscribe button on Mythbusting, because we're going to keep excavating the uncomfortable infrastructure that civilization prefers to keep buried. The machinery of state violence is always more sophisticated than we want to believe, and the evidence is always there for anyone willing to look beneath the surface. So what hidden historical infrastructure should we investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.